A young woman disappeared while riding her scooter, vanishing without a trace. But 10 years later, contractors working on a renovation find something hidden in a basement, and what they discover makes their blood run cold. Madison Chambers crouched over her desk, absorbed in the book she was annotating, her blonde hair tucked behind one ear. The alarm on her phone chimed softly, 7:15 in the morning, and she stretched, glancing around the empty dorm room. Her roommate Abigail's bed was already neatly made. She'd left early to catch the bus to Albany, where she'd spend the weekend with her parents. The September sunlight filtered through half-drawn blinds, casting golden stripes across the room. Madison crossed to her closet and pulled out the yellow sundress she'd been saving for tomorrow's fall festival. She held it against herself, studying her reflection in the full-length mirror mounted on the closet door. The dress complemented her fair complexion and made her blue eyes appear more vibrant. It was simple but elegant, perfect for the festival's casual atmosphere. "This will do," she murmured to herself, carefully hanging the dress on a hook on the outside of the closet. She needed to make sure it remained wrinkle-free for tomorrow's festivities. After a quick shower, Madison gathered her materials for the day's classes. Her copy of T.S. Eliot's collected poems was heavily annotated, colorful sticky notes protruding from various pages. Dr. Whitman had assigned a comparative analysis of The Wasteland and 4 quartets, and Madison was determined to impress him with her insights. At 8:30, Madison settled at her favorite corner table in the campus cafeteria. Steam rose from her almond milk latte as she spread her notes across the table, reviewing her analysis of Eliot's use of fragmented imagery. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget dinner Sunday. Dad's making his famous lasagna. Love you," Helen had written. Madison smiled, typing back quickly. "Wouldn't miss it. Tell Dad to make extra for leftovers. Love you too." She sipped her latte, watching the campus come to life through the large windows. Students hurried to morning classes, professors clutched travel mugs of coffee, and maintenance staff emptied trash bins from overnight. The predictability of campus life comforted her. Everything in its place, everyone following their routines. By 10:15, Madison had taken her usual seat in the third row of Dr. Whitman's Literature of Modernism seminar. The classroom smelled of old books and coffee, familiar and academic. Dr. Whitman, with his salt and pepper beard and elbow-patched blazer, paced at the front of the room, gesturing animatedly as he discussed Eliot's conversion to Anglicanism and its effect on his later works. "Ms. Chambers," he said suddenly, his gaze fixing on Madison, "would you say that Eliot's religious transformation fundamentally altered his poetic voice or merely provided new imagery for his existing concerns?" Madison felt a momentary flutter of nervousness, but answered confidently, "I believe it was more than just new imagery, Professor. In The Wasteland, we see fragmentation and despair without resolution, but in 4 quartets, that same fragmentation becomes part of a larger spiritual unity. The voice hasn't changed so much as found what it was searching for all along." Dr. Whitman's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary. "Precisely the point, Ms. Chambers. Well articulated." His approving nod sent a small thrill of academic validation through her. At lunch, Madison joined her friends at their usual table outside the student union. The September air was crisp but pleasant, carrying hints of autumn leaves and distant wood smoke. "I can't wait for tomorrow," said Rachel, pushing her curly red hair from her face. "The cider donuts at the fall festival are literally the reason I survive midterms." "Don't forget about tonight," added Zoe, nudging Madison playfully. "My roommate's cousin is bringing his band. They're supposed to be really good." Madison nodded, picking at her salad. "I'm definitely coming. Just need to stop by the library first to grab some books for my modernism paper." The afternoon sun had begun its descent when Madison arrived at Lake Champlain Chocolates for her 4-hour shift. The shop bustled with Friday afternoon customers, many of them tourists enjoying the lakeside views before the weekend crowds arrived. "Madison, can you switch to Saturday morning next week?" her manager asked as she tied on her apron. "Ethan has a family emergency." "I can't," Madison replied, arranging truffles in the display case. "I have brunch with my parents on Saturdays. What about Sunday afternoon instead?" At 3:30, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Precisamos conversar sobre seu trabalho final. Meu escritório, 5 p.m. Professor W." Madison stared at the message, her stomach tightening slightly. She hadn't given her personal number to Dr. Whitman. After a moment's hesitation, she replied with a simple, "I'll be there," then slipped the phone back into her pocket, her previous good mood slightly dampened. When her shift ended, Madison made her way across campus to the English department building. The administrative assistant had already left for the day, the outer office dark and silent. Dr. Whitman's door stood slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. "Come in, Ms. Chambers," his voice called before she could knock. At 5:45, Madison emerged from the office, her face noticeably paler than when she had entered. She stuffed several papers hastily into her backpack, her hands slightly unsteady, and walked quickly toward the exit, checking her watch repeatedly. By 6:20, safely ensconced in her usual corner of the dining hall, Madison composed a text to her mother. "Jantando no refeitório. Lembra que hoje vou na festa da Rachel depois? Não me espere acordada amanhã para o café, te ligo quando acordar. Te amo." Her meal consisted of a half-eaten salad and untouched apple. Madison scrolled through her phone, occasionally glancing up at the entrance as if expecting or dreading someone's arrival. At 7:17, as she was disposing of her tray, Dr. Whitman appeared at her elbow. "Ms. Chambers, have you considered what we discussed?" he asked quietly, his professional smile not quite reaching his eyes. "I need more time," Madison replied, her voice barely audible over the cafeteria noise. "Can we talk next week instead?" "Time isn't infinite, Madison," he said, his use of her first name uncharacteristic and deliberate. "Neither are opportunities. Remember that." Back at Coolidge Hall by 7:35, Madison hurried to her room, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder as she walked the dormitory corridor. The security camera in the hallway captured her worried expression as she unlocked her door and disappeared inside. At 7:42, she texted Abigail, "Esqueci de avisar, peguei seu carregador emprestado, o meu quebrou, vou sair agora, mas devo voltar em 1 hora. Bom fim de semana com seus pais." 5 minutes later, Madison emerged from the dormitory, wearing her yellow sundress, light denim jacket, white sneakers, and carrying a small brown crossbody bag. Her distinctive pink scooter waited at the building's entrance, the cherry blossom sticker on the front fender catching the early evening light. The security camera captured her departure at 7:47 as she adjusted her bag, tucked her hair behind her ear, and kicked the scooter into motion, heading toward town. At 8:03, a security camera outside the Ben & Jerry's on Church Street recorded Madison riding her pink scooter toward Lake Champlain. Her expression appeared relaxed, her posture natural. There was nothing in the footage to suggest fear or distress, nothing to indicate that this would be the last confirmed sighting of Madison Chambers. Dylan Reeves, waiting anxiously at Leunig's Bistro for almost an hour, checked his phone again for messages from Madison. Nothing. Sighing, he opened the Find My Friends app to see if she was on her way. His breath caught as a notification appeared, showing Madison's location at a remote point on Lake Champlain, a location where there shouldn't be any cell service at all. Dylan Reeves stared at his phone in confusion. The blue dot marking Madison's location pulsed steadily over a remote section of Lake Champlain, at least half a mile from shore. He zoomed in, thinking it must be an app malfunction, but the location remained fixed. Unease crept up his spine as he dialed her number again, straight to voicemail, just like the previous 5 attempts. "Hey, it's Madison. Leave a message and I'll call you back when I can. Madison, I'm still at Leunig's. It's past 9. Are you okay? Please call me." He hung up, tapping his fingers nervously on the bistro's polished table. Their server approached with a sympathetic smile. "Still waiting?" "Yeah," Dylan replied, checking the time again. 9:15. Madison was never this late without messaging. "I think I'll close out. She might have gone straight to the party." 30 minutes later, Dylan arrived at Rachel's apartment, the bass from the music vibrating through the building's thin walls. He scanned the crowded living room, searching for Madison's yellow dress or her distinctive laugh, but found neither. "Dylan!" Rachel called, pushing through the crowd. "Where's Madison?" The music seemed to dim as concern spread across her face when Dylan explained the situation. Rachel immediately pulled out her phone, texting Madison while others around them did the same. The party's energy shifted, conversations turning to whispered concerns as midnight approached with still no word. "Maybe she decided to skip both and went back to her dorm," suggested Zoe, though the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her worry. "She mentioned being tired from midterms." Dylan nodded, sending one final text. "Let me know you're safe. We can meet at the festival tomorrow instead." The next morning, sunshine streamed through Dylan's apartment windows, belying his restless night. He'd barely slept, checking his phone hourly for messages that never came. At 9:30, he texted again, "Breakfast before the festival? Coffee is on me." When no response came, anxiety twisted his stomach into knots. By 1 in the afternoon, with the fall festival in full swing and still no word from Madison, Dylan made his way to Coolidge Hall. He knocked on her door repeatedly, the hollow sound echoing in the quiet weekend corridor. "Looking for someone?" asked a student emerging from a nearby room. "Madison Chambers, room 215. Have you seen her today or yesterday?" The student shook her head. "Not since Friday afternoon, I think. She was heading out with books." 2:15 rolled into 3, then 4 o'clock. Dylan contacted everyone who might have seen Madison: classmates, co-workers at Lake Champlain Chocolates, her academic advisor. No one had heard from her since Friday evening. The gravity of the situation crashed over him like a wave. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled to Helen Chambers' contact information, which Madison had shared for emergencies. This qualified. "Mrs. Chambers? This is Dylan Reeves, Madison's friend." His voice cracked as he continued. "I'm sorry to bother you, but have you heard from Madison since yesterday? We were supposed to meet last night and she never showed up. No one has seen her." The silence on the other end lasted only seconds but felt eternal. When Helen spoke, her voice was controlled but tight with dawning fear. "She texted me around 6 last night, said she was going to a party." "She never made it to the party," Dylan said quietly. "And she's not answering her phone." By 7:40 that evening, Helen and Robert Chambers were driving the 170 miles from Montpelier to Burlington. The silence in their car was oppressive, broken only by Helen's periodic attempts to call Madison's phone. "She wouldn't just disappear," Robert said after nearly 30 minutes of silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "This isn't like her." Helen stared out the window at the darkening Vermont landscape. "I know," was all she could manage. By 9:15, Helen was using the spare key Madison had given her, pushing open the door to room 215, with Robert and Dylan waiting anxiously behind her. The scene inside halted them in the doorway. Madison's bed was perfectly made, books neatly arranged on her shelf, laptop closed on the desk. Her toothbrush stood in its holder in the bathroom. A green dress, presumably for the festival, hung pressed and ready in the closet. The only thing missing was Madison herself. "Her passport is still here," Robert said, checking the desk drawer where Madison kept important documents. "Credit cards, too." "Just her phone is gone," Helen whispered, a tremor entering her voice for the first time. Campus security directed them to Burlington Police Department, where Officer Derek Sullivan took their statement with professional detachment that bordered on dismissiveness. "Adults have the right to disappear temporarily," he explained, filling out the report form. "Most return within 72 hours. "My daughter would never leave without telling us," Helen insisted, her composure fraying. "Something is wrong." Sullivan's expression softened slightly as he noted that Madison had left all her personal belongings and identification behind. He upgraded the case to missing under suspicious circumstances and promised a detective would contact them in the morning. Sunday passed in a blur of phone calls and growing dread. By Monday morning, Detective Raymond Morales, A 15-year veteran with tired eyes and salt and pepper hair was reviewing Madison's case file over his third coffee of the day. "Tell me about Friday," Morales said as he interviewed Dylan in an empty classroom. "Every detail you can remember." Dylan described their plans, the missed meeting, the strange location on the tracking app. Morales noted everything meticulously, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Meanwhile, a technical team processed Madison's dorm room, dusting for fingerprints and examining her laptop. Helen watched from the doorway, arms wrapped tightly around herself. By mid-afternoon, the cellular company had provided Madison's phone records. "Last activity at 8:14 p.m. Friday," Morales told the Chambers. "Location data puts it near the north dock of Lake Champlain. After that, nothing, either turned off or destroyed." Tuesday morning dawned cold and clear as the first major search operation assembled at the lakefront. Divers prepared equipment, dog handlers checked leashes, and volunteers received area assignments. Madison's pink scooter was nowhere to be found, in any nearby parking areas or bike racks. While searchers combed the shoreline, Helen and Robert returned to their hotel room, transforming it into an impromptu command center with maps marked with search grids and lists of Madison's friends and contacts. "In breaking news," announced the television in the background, University of Vermont sophomore Madison Chambers has been reported missing since Friday evening. Police are asking anyone with information to come forward. As the technical analyst reviewed security footage from cameras near the lake, he suddenly froze a frame and zoomed in on a shadowy figure watching Madison from a distance, a silhouette that Detective Morales immediately recognized as belonging to someone familiar with the case. "Edward Lamotte," Morales muttered, enlarging the grainy image on the computer screen. "Former university maintenance worker. Dismissed in 2011 for inappropriate behavior toward female students." The technical analyst nodded, marking the timestamp, 9:30 the following morning. "He's definitely watching her from that bench, follows her with his eyes for nearly 30 seconds. Morales immediately dispatched 2 officers to Lamotte's last known address, a rundown apartment complex about a mile from the lake. The officers returned an hour later, reporting no answer at his door. A neighbor mentioned not seeing Lamotte for a couple of days, which wasn't unusual for the reclusive man. Meanwhile, the forensic team made a significant discovery in Madison's dorm room. After removing her mattress for a more thorough inspection, they found a leather-bound journal hidden within a small cut in the underside of the mattress lining. "We need to process this for prints first," said the lead technician, carefully bagging the journal. "But preliminary glance shows entries up to September 12th, 2 days before she disappeared." By early afternoon, the journal had been photographed and partially processed. Morales handed the sealed evidence bag to Helen, who opened it with trembling fingers. She flipped carefully through the pages until stopping at an entry dated September 5th. "I don't know how to get out of this situation," Helen read aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't understand the meaning of no." She looked up at Morales, her eyes wide. "What situation? Who is he?" Even more disturbing was the discovery that several pages appeared to have been torn out near the end, something Morales immediately flagged as significant. In another room at the police station, Dylan Reeves sat across from Detective Torres, Morales' partner. His face was pale with exhaustion and worry. "We found some messages on Madison's laptop," Torres said, sliding printouts across the table. "There seems to have been some tension between you two recently." Dylan rubbed his face. "We had a disagreement about a party last weekend. She wanted to leave early. I wanted to stay. It was stupid." His voice cracked. "I should have gone to pick her up at the dorm. Why didn't I just go get her?" Torres nodded sympathetically, but continued her questioning for another hour before finally clearing Dylan as a suspect. His alibi for Friday night was solid. Dozens of witnesses placed him at Rachel's party, and his cell phone location data confirmed his movements. Late that afternoon, Robert Chambers arrived at the hotel where Helen had been staying. Their embrace was brief, almost formal. before Robert immediately spread maps across the bed and began creating a detailed timeline on the wall with marker and tape. "I've compiled every known location and time," he explained, his engineering mind approaching the problem methodically. "If we create a radius based on average walking and driving speeds from her last known position, we can prioritize search areas." By 7 that evening, the Chambers held an impromptu press conference in the hotel lobby. Local reporters clustered around as Helen clutched Madison's high school graduation photo. "Please," Robert said, his voice uncharacteristically unsteady, "if anyone saw Madison Friday night, her yellow dress, her pink scooter, any detail could help bring our daughter home." The next morning, over 40 volunteers gathered at the campus center, receiving assigned search areas and stacks of flyers bearing Madison's photo. The community's response had been immediate and overwhelming, with students, faculty, and local residents joining the effort. "We'll focus on the lakefront today," explained the search coordinator, "then expand outward systematically. Remember, we're looking for any sign of Madison or her scooter. Clothing, personal items, anything unusual." While the search continued, Morales drove to Albany to interview Abigail Torres, Madison's roommate. Sitting in her parents' living room, Abigail appeared nervous, fidgeting with a throw pillow as she recounted her friendship with Madison. "She was acting different the last couple weeks," Abigail admitted. "More withdrawn, checking her phone constantly." "Did she mention having problems with anyone? A professor, perhaps?" Morales asked, noting how Abigail's eyes flickered at the mention of faculty. "She didn't like her literature professor much. Dr. Whitman said his classes were challenging." Abigail hesitated, but lots of students find him difficult. Back in Burlington, forensic technicians were analyzing the torn pages from Madison's journal, using ultraviolet light to reveal partial impressions of writing on the remaining paper. The fragmentary words they reconstructed included meeting, alone, and what appeared to be threatened. That afternoon, Helen and Robert visited Lake Champlain Chocolates, where Madison had worked part-time. Her manager described her as reliable and punctual, though he had noticed her seeming distracted in recent weeks. "She asked to change shifts twice last month," he recalled. "Wanted to avoid certain hours. I assumed it was for class scheduling." As evening approached, a search warrant was finally executed at Edward Lamott's apartment. Officers found a cluttered, dingy one-bedroom with newspaper clippings about various missing persons cases pinned to one wall. Most disturbing was a university newspaper article about Madison's participation in a poetry reading last spring, her photo circled in red marker. Meanwhile, Dillon organized a candlelight vigil on campus. Hundreds gathered in silence, their faces illuminated by flickering flames as they formed a circle around a large photo of Madison. The university president spoke briefly about community and hope, his words hollow against the backdrop of growing fear. In their hotel room later that night, Robert sat alone, methodically examining campus security footage frame by frame on his laptop. Helen had finally fallen asleep, clutching Madison's childhood teddy bear Pip to her chest. On the muted television, a national news correspondent stood in front of Coolidge Hall, Madison's smiling photo appearing in the corner of the screen. The next morning, Burlington awoke to shocking news. Edward Lamott had been found dead in his apartment, apparently by suicide, with a note beside his body that said only, "I wasn't the one who took the scooter girl, but I know who did." Detective Morales stared at Lamott's suicide note, its cryptic message sending a chill through the investigation room. "I wasn't the one who took the scooter girl, but I know who did." The handwriting analysis confirmed it was Lamott's own writing, not forced or coerced, suggesting he had written it voluntarily before taking his own life. "This changes everything," Morales told Chief Larson during the emergency meeting at the station. "Lamott was watching her, obsessed with her, but the note indicates someone else is responsible." Chief Larson rubbed his temples. "Are we sure? Suicide notes can be misleading, especially from disturbed individuals. Could be his final manipulation, denying involvement while still inserting himself into the case." Morales shook his head firmly. The evidence in his apartment doesn't support direct involvement. He was a voyeur, not an actor, and that note suggests he knew something specific. When Helen and Robert Chambers were informed about Lamott's death, their reactions revealed the growing rift between them. Helen's shoulders sagged with momentary relief, while Robert's expression hardened with skepticism. So that's it? Case closed because a convenient suspect killed himself? Robert's voice rose. Where's Madison then? Where's her scooter? This explains nothing. Helen touched his arm tentatively. Robert, please. The police are doing everything they can. The document specialist finished her analysis of Lamott's suicide note that afternoon, explaining to Morales that the writing displayed signs of genuine distress, but not coercion. Whoever wrote this believed what they were saying, she concluded. The pressure patterns suggest it was written rapidly, but deliberately. Meanwhile, the forensic team made significant progress reconstructing the torn journal pages. Using advanced imaging techniques, they revealed more fragmentary text. Private meetings and Dr. W appeared multiple times, along with afraid to tell anyone. That evening, Chief Larson held a press conference, his demeanor grave as cameras flashed. While we are investigating Mr. Lamott's death as potentially related to Madison Chambers' disappearance, I want to emphasize that our investigation remains active and ongoing. Reporters shouted questions about the note, which Larson refused to discuss in detail. The following morning, Morales visited Dr. Lawrence Whitman's office on campus. The literature professor welcomed him into his elegantly appointed space, bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes and academic awards. Madison was a promising student, Whitman said, his voice measured and articulate, bright, insightful. Our interaction that Friday was brief, simply about an upcoming assignment deadline. I'm deeply concerned about her disappearance. Morales noted how Whitman maintained perfect composure throughout the interview, his responses practiced and polished. When asked about his whereabouts Friday evening, Whitman stated he'd been home with his wife, an alibi Morales made a mental note to verify independently. Later that morning, Helen sat under harsh studio lights at the local CNN affiliate, Madison's teddy bear Pip clutched in her trembling hands. The national exposure had been arranged after Lamott's suicide created renewed interest in the case. Madison never went anywhere without telling us, Helen said, silent tears tracking down her face. She wouldn't leave Pip behind if she planned to go away. She's kept him since she was 4. The camera lingered on her exhausted face, broadcasting a mother's anguish to millions. That afternoon, Robert attended a tense meeting with University President Jeffrey Wallace, whose concerns seemed outweighed by institutional anxiety. The university is fully cooperating with authorities, Wallace assured him. However, I must be frank. Prolonged media attention becomes counterproductive after a point. Perhaps considering a more private resolution would be beneficial for everyone involved. Robert's face flushed with anger. A private resolution? My daughter is missing, possibly dead, and you're worried about enrollment numbers. November brought the first heavy snowfall, complicating search efforts around the lake. Teams struggled against bitter winds and accumulating snow, the pink scooter still nowhere to be found, despite weeks of searching. Dogs lost scent trails in the freezing conditions, and ground-penetrating radar became ineffective on the frozen terrain. Back at the station, Morales reviewed Madison's phone records for the dozenth time, finally noticing a pattern he'd previously overlooked. Multiple short calls from the English department office during times when classes weren't in session, all within 3 weeks before her disappearance. Each call lasted less than a minute, just long enough to leave a message. At a quiet cafe off campus, Dylan and Abigail met to share memories and concerns. Both appeared drained by the constant questioning and hovering suspicion. She was different those last few weeks, Dylan admitted, stirring his untouched coffee. Jumpy, checking her phone constantly. I thought she was losing interest in me, but now I wonder if she was scared of something. Abigail nodded slowly. She started locking the bathroom door even when it was just us in the room. She never did that before. In his newly rented apartment, Robert had transformed the spare bedroom into an investigation center. Red string connected photos and timeline markers on a large corkboard, with Dr. Whitman's faculty photo prominently circled. Robert's engineering mind approached the case as a problem to be solved, a system to be analyzed, perhaps the only way he could process the emotional devastation of his daughter's disappearance. On Christmas Eve, Helen lit a single candle in the apartment window and hung a stocking with Madison's name. A local newspaper photographer captured the moment, a mother's vigil for her missing child. The image went viral overnight, appearing in national publications as a symbol of enduring hope against diminishing odds. 3 months after Madison's disappearance, when winter's grip had begun to loosen and interest in the case had waned, freshman Emma Chen was cutting across the thawing lawn near Coolidge Hall when her foot struck something partially buried in the melting snow. Bending down, she discovered an iPhone with a cracked screen, but still powered on. The screen illuminated at her touch, revealing a draft message to 911. "Please help, Professor Whitman is and then nothing more. Emma Chen's hand trembled as she stared at the message on the damaged iPhone. The partial text to 911 sent a chill through her body, despite the mild spring air. She looked around quickly before slipping the phone into her pocket and rushing toward the campus police office. By late afternoon, Madison's phone was in the hands of Detective Morales, who carefully examined the draft message while wearing latex gloves. "Please help, Prof. Whitman is The abrupt ending spoke volumes about the moment the message was interrupted. "We need full data extraction immediately," Morales instructed the digital forensic technician. "Every text, photo, location ping. I want it all recovered, even deleted content." The technician nodded grimly, connecting the damaged device to specialized equipment. "Battery's almost gone, but there's enough charge to begin the process. I'll create a complete image of the device before it dies completely." Morales immediately called the chambers, reaching Helen on the third attempt. Her stifled cry when informed about the phone discovery echoed through the detective's office, the sound of hope and dread intermingling. "We've found Madison's phone," he said simply, "and there's something you need to see." The following morning, Chief Larson stood before a sea of cameras and microphones, announcing the formation of a special task force dedicated to Madison's case. Beside him stood Detective Morales, noticeably thinner from his cancer treatments, but with renewed determination in his eyes. "The recent discovery has provided significant new evidence," Larson stated firmly. "Detective Morales will lead this specialized team, with additional resources allocated to follow every lead." Behind closed doors, the technical team worked methodically through the phone's contents. By midday, they had discovered something disturbing, a series of photos taken surreptitiously inside what appeared to be Dr. Whitman's office. The metadata revealed they were captured in the weeks before her disappearance, showing the professor watching Madison through his office window as she walked across campus. She was documenting his behavior, Morales realized, scrolling through the images, building evidence against him. That afternoon, Morales and his new assistant, Detective Samantha Torres, interviewed Jennifer Weber, a former student of Whitman's who had dropped his class midway through the previous semester. "He insisted on private meetings," Jennifer said nervously, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting the professor to appear. "Always after hours, always alone. He'd lock the door, saying he didn't want interruptions." She twisted a tissue in her hands. "He'd stand too close, touch my shoulder when reviewing my work. When I started bringing a friend to wait outside, he got angry. Said I wasn't taking my education seriously." Back at the department, Torres dug through academic records, uncovering a disturbing pattern. At least 7 female students had dropped Whitman's courses mid-semester over the past 5 years, often with vague explanations about course load or personal reasons. As evening approached, Morales and Torres arrived at the elegant Victorian home of the Whitmans. Catherine Whitman, a slender woman in her early 40s with prematurely gray hair, received them with visible discomfort. "Lawrence is at an academic conference in Boston," she explained, leading them to a pristine living room. He's presenting a paper on T.S. Eliot. Her hands fidgeted with her cardigan buttons as she answered their questions, her eyes never quite meeting theirs. When asked to confirm her husband's alibi for the night of Madison's disappearance, she recited the same answer she'd given months before. They had been home together, watching documentaries. Meanwhile, at their rented apartment, Robert and Helen engaged in their most heated argument since Madison's disappearance. "I'm going to confront him myself," Robert shouted, pacing the living room. "The police are moving too slowly. Bureaucratic nonsense while that man walks free." Helen grabbed his arm desperately. "And what happens when you assault a professor based on circumstantial evidence? You'll be arrested, and then what good are you to Madison?" Her voice broke. "Please, Robert, trust the process." Robert yanked his arm away and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. He drove aimlessly through the darkened campus, eventually parking across from the Whitman's house. The silhouettes of two people, Morales and Torres, though he didn't know this, moved across the front windows. Robert sat watching until well past midnight, his breath fogging the cold car windows. The next morning, Helen arrived for her appointment with Dr. Sarah Klein, the trauma therapist she had finally agreed to see after months of sleepless nights. "I can't stop imagining what happened to her," Helen confessed, tears streaming down her face. "Is she cold? Is she hurt? Is she couldn't finish the sentence. What if she's been alive all this time, waiting for us to find her, and we've failed her?" While Helen sought professional help, the technical team made another breakthrough. They recovered deleted text messages showing a pattern of manipulation from Whitman to Madison. "Your paper shows promise, but currently sits at a CI. I can help you improve it during our private session tomorrow. Disappointing you missed our meeting. Your grade will reflect your commitment level. Your academic future depends on demonstrating proper appreciation for mentorship." Later that afternoon, Morales interviewed Dr. James Reynolds, chair of the English department. The distinguished professor shifted uncomfortably in his seat when asked about complaints against Whitman. "There was an informal concern raised last year," Reynolds admitted reluctantly. "A student felt uncomfortable with his attention, but nothing was substantiated, and the student eventually withdrew her complaint." He cleared his throat. "We handle these matters discreetly to protect everyone involved." By early evening, District Attorney Michael Coleman reviewed the mounting evidence in his office with Morales. "It's compelling, Ray, but still circumstantial," Coleman said regretfully. "The phone message, the photos, the pattern of behavior, it all points to Whitman, but no judge will give us a comprehensive search warrant without something more concrete." He tapped his pen against the desk thoughtfully. "Keep digging. We need one solid piece that places him with Madison that night." While the investigation crawled through legal hurdles, Ernest Wheeler pulled his fishing net from the shallow waters of Lake Champlain's northern shore. The net came up heavier than expected, and as he hauled it onto his small boat, he discovered the cause. A pink scooter, its once bright paint faded from months underwater, with a cherry blossom sticker still barely visible on the front fender. Tangled in the handlebars was what appeared to be a strand of blonde hair. Ernest Wheeler's weathered hands trembled as he stared at the pink scooter tangled in his fishing net. The early morning light glinted off the metal frame, now dulled by months submerged in Lake Champlain's cold waters. He immediately recognized it from the missing person flyers that had papered Burlington since September. "Good Lord," he whispered, carefully examining the cherry blossom sticker still clinging to the front fender. More disturbing was the strand of blonde hair caught in the handlebar mechanism, waving gently in the spring breeze. Within 2 hours, the shoreline was transformed into a hive of police activity. Yellow tape cordoned off a wide perimeter as Morales interviewed Wheeler, who pointed toward the shallow waters where his net had caught the unexpected find. "Been fishing these waters 40 years, Wheeler explained, his voice gravelly with age. "Never pulled up nothing like this before. Knew right away it was the missing girl's scooter." The forensics team documented the scooter's condition meticulously before moving it, photographing every angle and marking the precise location where it was found. Technicians noted deep scratches along the bottom and sides that didn't match typical accident damage. These marks are consistent with deliberate dragging, the lead technician told Morales, pointing to parallel grooves along the scooter's underside. Someone wanted this in the water, and they were careful about it. By mid-morning, Robert Chambers stood dripping on the shoreline, having rushed from the apartment still wearing his pajama bottoms under hastily donned jeans. His breath caught as he examined the scooter, his fingers tracing the serial number etched beneath the footboard, the same number he'd recorded in the warranty registration when he purchased it for Madison's 19th birthday. "It's hers," he confirmed, his voice hollow. The cherry blossom sticker was from her trip to Washington, D.C. last spring. Inside the forensic laboratory, technicians carefully removed the strands of hair from the handlebar and prepared them for DNA testing. Preliminary visual comparison is consistent with samples from Madison's hairbrush, the lab supervisor noted. "We should have confirmation within hours." The discovery sparked renewed interest from national media outlets. Helicopter cameras captured aerial footage of the search operation, broadcasting live images of divers entering the cold lake waters in a methodical spiral pattern from where the scooter was discovered. On shore, teams with cadaver dogs combed the surrounding wooded areas, focusing on potential paths someone might have taken to dispose of the scooter. That evening, Robert Chambers sat in the sparsely furnished office of Michael Donovan, a former FBI agent now working as a private investigator. Donovan's reputation preceded him, 27 years with the Bureau's Violent Crimes Division before retiring to Vermont. "The police are doing their best," Robert acknowledged, signing the substantial contract, "but they're constrained by procedures and manpower. I need someone who can focus exclusively on finding Madison." Donovan nodded gravely, studying the case files Robert had brought. "I'll start immediately. My methods might differ from official channels, but my priority is results." Back at the apartment, Helen confronted Robert about the unexpected bank withdrawal she'd discovered while paying bills. $40,000, Robert? Without even discussing it with me?" "For Donovan," he replied unapologetically. "He's the best there is at finding missing persons." "We're throwing money away." Helen's voice rose with frustration. "The police are doing everything possible. They lost our daughter for 9 months, Robert shouted, slamming his fist on the counter. 9 months, Helen. Her scooter was in the lake this entire time and they missed it. I don't trust them anymore. The next morning brought clear skies and dozens of volunteers with search dogs, combing through the wooded areas near the lake. The dogs zigzagged through undergrowth and down makeshift paths, handlers watching attentively for any alert behavior. By midday, the preliminary DNA results confirmed what everyone already suspected. The hair found on the scooter belonged to Madison. Morales stared at the report, a mixture of vindication and dread settling in his stomach. The physical evidence now corroborated the electronic clues, pointing toward foul play rather than voluntary disappearance. With this confirmation, Morales turned his attention back to Edward Lamotte's connection to the case. Reviewing photographs from Lamotte's apartment, he noticed something previously overlooked. A pay stub indicating Lamotte had briefly worked maintenance in the building where Whitman lived 3 years earlier. He had access, Morales muttered. He knew Whitman's routines, his habits. As sunset approached, Michael Donovan parked his nondescript sedan across from the university's English department, his camera equipped with a telephoto lens. When Whitman emerged at 5:15, Donovan followed at a discreet distance, documenting the professor's movements as he drove not toward his Victorian home, but to an unfamiliar residential neighborhood across town. Meanwhile, on the lake, technicians deployed advanced sonar equipment, methodically mapping the lakebed for anomalies. The digital screen displayed a ghostly topographical image of the underwater terrain, with technicians marking several unusual formations for closer investigation by divers. Helen sat alone in Madison's preserved dorm room that evening, surrounded by mementos of her daughter's truncated college experience. Running her fingers along the spines of Madison's books, she noticed a folded paper tucked inside a collection of Emily Dickinson poems. Pulling it out, she found a letter written in Madison's neat handwriting, addressed simply, "To whoever finds this, if something happens to me." With trembling hands, Helen unfolded the letter and began to read. The words blurred through her tears as Madison's voice seemed to fill the silent room, detailing her systematic documentation of Whitman's predatory behavior toward herself and other students. The final paragraph mentioned a USB drive containing evidence, hidden inside the teddy bear Pip, that Helen had carried with her throughout the months of searching, never knowing the secret it contained. Helen's hands shook uncontrollably as she carried Pip, Madison's beloved teddy bear, to the kitchen table. The realization that she had been holding crucial evidence for months sent waves of conflicting emotions through her. Hope that this might finally lead to answers, and devastation that she hadn't discovered it sooner. With a small pair of scissors, she carefully cut along the teddy bear's back seam, her breath catching when her fingers touched something solid, hidden among the stuffing. The small blue USB drive emerged, no larger than her thumbnail. 10 minutes later, Helen sat in the police station with Detective Morales, both staring at the computer screen in stunned silence as Madison's face appeared in a video recording. "If you're watching this," Madison began, her expression solemn, "then something has happened to me. This is my insurance policy." She explained how she had begun documenting Professor Whitman's behavior after he cornered her in his office and suggested her grade depended on private tutoring sessions. The video continued for nearly 7 minutes, Madison methodically outlining instances of harassment and naming other students who had confided similar experiences. "She knew she was in danger," Morales whispered as the video ended. "She was building a case." Throughout the night, forensic IT specialists worked to catalog and authenticate the USB's contents. 17 audio recordings of interactions with Whitman, 34 photographs documenting his pattern of following her across campus, and a detailed digital diary spanning the 3 months before her disappearance. Many entries corroborated information they had already uncovered, but with Madison's real-time perspective, adding chilling context. By 8:15 the following morning, District Attorney Michael Coleman stood before Judge Sullivan, presenting the newly discovered evidence to secure an emergency search warrant for Whitman's residence and office. "We have reason to believe Professor Whitman was directly involved in Madison Chambers' disappearance," Coleman argued. Her own testimony, recorded before she vanished, identifies him as a threat. 2 hours later, a tactical team positioned themselves discreetly around the Whitman residence, while Morales and Torres approached the front door with the warrant in hand. Catherine Whitman answered, her face draining of color when Morales explained why they were there. "Lawrence is upstairs in his study," she said flatly, stepping aside. The search proceeded methodically through the elegant home. Lawrence Whitman sat rigidly in an armchair in the living room, watching with cold detachment as officers moved from room to room. Catherine nervously offered coffee that no one accepted, her hands trembling as she returned the untouched mugs to the kitchen. In Whitman's home office, forensic technicians discovered a locked drawer in his desk. When opened, it revealed dozens of photographs of female students, captured without their knowledge in various campus locations. Madison appeared in several images, often with her pink scooter visible in the frame. "This goes beyond academic interest," Torres commented, cataloging the photographs as evidence. Later that afternoon, Michael Donovan interviewed Edgar Simmons, an elderly neighbor of the Whitmans who had lived across the street for over 30 years. "Professor keeps odd hours," Simmons mentioned casually, while watering his front garden, "always coming and going late at night to that other house he visits." Donovan's interest piqued immediately. "Other house?" "The Victorian on Pearl Street," Simmons clarified. "Used to belong to his uncle, I think. Lawrence goes there sometimes after midnight, carrying boxes, tools, very secretive about it." By early evening, Morales had Catherine Whitman alone in an interview room at the police station. He played one of Madison's recordings, a conversation where Madison directly referenced Catherine's convenient absences during Whitman's tutoring sessions. "He said you were visiting your sister in Boston," Madison's voice stated, "that you'd be gone all weekend." Catherine's composure finally crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she admitted the truth. "I was in Boston the night she disappeared, Not at home like I told you before." Her voice shook with emotion. "Lawrence said a student was making false accusations against him, that I needed to protect him. I've been protecting him for 23 years. Back at the apartment, Robert had transformed the spare bedroom into what Helen now called his evidence room. The walls were covered with photographs, maps, and timelines connected by colored strings. Post-it notes filled gaps with theories and questions. His once methodical engineering mind had given way to obsessive pattern-seeking, the room becoming increasingly chaotic as the months passed. The following morning, Helen attended her support group for families of missing persons. After months of listening to others, she finally shared her complete story. Madison's disappearance, the discovery of the scooter, and now the USB drive that pointed directly to Whitman. "I feel like I failed her," Helen confessed, tears streaming down her face. "The evidence was literally in my arms this whole time." Meanwhile, Donovan spent hours at the county records office, eventually discovering that the Victorian house on Pearl Street was still officially registered to Lawrence Whitman's deceased uncle, Gerald Whitman, with no record of property transfer after his death 5 years earlier. By mid-afternoon, Morales and Donovan sat in an unmarked car, watching the Pearl Street property from a distance. The house appeared abandoned, windows covered with heavy curtains, paint peeling from the ornate trim, overgrown garden. Yet the mailbox had been recently emptied, and fresh tire tracks marked the gravel driveway. "He's keeping it off the radar," Donovan observed. "No paper trail, no property tax in his name." Later that evening, a tense meeting unfolded in Judge Sullivan's chambers. The prosecutor and Morales presented their case for a search warrant for the Pearl Street property, while the judge expressed concerns about sufficient probable cause. "The connection is tenuous," Sullivan argued. "Ownership through an uncle, occasional visits. That's not enough for a comprehensive search warrant." "We have reason to believe this property may contain evidence related to 3 missing women," Morales countered, revealing for the first time their suspicion that Madison wasn't Whitman's only victim. As Judge Sullivan finally signed the search warrant, surveillance cameras Donovan had discreetly installed captured Whitman entering the Victorian house through the back door, carrying gardening tools and bags of quicklime. The tactical team moved into position as dusk settled over the Victorian house on Pearl Street. Officers with weapons drawn created a perimeter, while Detective Morales and Torres approached the front entrance. The weathered porch creaked beneath their careful steps. "Burlington Police, search warrant," Morales announced, his voice carrying through the quiet neighborhood. When no response came, Torres nodded to the tactical officer beside her, who stepped forward with a battering ram. The door splintered open on the first impact, revealing a dimly lit entryway. "Police, show yourself," Torres called, weapon raised as they entered. The sound of movement came from below, a rhythmic scraping noise emanating from the basement. The team moved methodically through the first floor before reaching the basement door. Morales led the descent down creaking wooden stairs, flashlight illuminating the darkness. In the center of the concrete floor stood Lawrence Whitman, trowel in hand, calmly smoothing wet concrete in a freshly poured section. His momentary surprise at their entrance quickly vanished behind his composed academic demeanor. "Detective Morales," Whitman acknowledged, setting down the trowel. "This is private property. I'm simply conducting renovations." 9:15 found Whitman seated on the front porch, hands cuffed before him as a precautionary measure while forensic technicians swarmed the property. The professor maintained his composure, explaining to Detective Torres with practiced eloquence that the house was merely an investment property he was preparing for sale. "The real estate market favors homes with updated features," he stated calmly. "Replacing the earthen basement floor with concrete increases the property value considerably." Inside, the house presented a disturbing contrast, completely empty of furniture or personal effects, yet meticulously clean. Every wall gleamed with fresh paint, still carrying the chemical smell of recent application. Windows had been sealed with plastic sheeting, preventing any view from outside. "He sanitized the entire place," the lead technician told Morales. multiple layers of paint on every surface. If there was evidence here, he's gone to extraordinary lengths to cover it. The basement presented the most troubling scene. The concrete floor appeared freshly poured in several sections, with one area still wet. The work was amateur. Uneven depths and poorly mixed aggregate suggested hasty application rather than professional construction. 10:30 that night, the forensic team employed specialized ultraviolet lighting throughout the house, searching for biological traces that might have escaped Whitman's cleaning efforts. Despite thorough examination, they found no visible evidence of blood spatter or other bodily fluids on any surface. "He's either incredibly thorough, or this isn't where it happened," Torres whispered to Morales as they observed the technician's work. Near midnight, Whitman sat in the interrogation room at the police station, maintaining his composed demeanor despite hours of questioning. His attorney, Edward Miller, interrupted frequently whenever questions strayed toward Madison Chambers or the scooter found in the lake. "My client is cooperating fully," Miller insisted. "However, these insinuations are baseless. Professor Whitman has explained his connection to the property, a simple real estate investment." The following morning, Catherine Whitman entered the law offices of Martha Goldstein, divorce attorney. Her usual perfect appearance had given way to exhaustion, hair pulled back without styling, minimal makeup failing to conceal the shadows beneath her eyes. 23 years, Catherine said softly as she completed the paperwork. 23 years of gaslighting, of being told my suspicions were paranoia, of being sent away whenever he needed space for his work. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed her name. I enabled him by looking away. Later that morning, Catherine met with Morales and Torres at a small cafe several miles from campus, where she was unlikely to encounter colleagues. "It started with small things," she explained, stirring her untouched tea. "Items in our home that weren't mine. A lipstick shade I never wore, earrings I didn't recognize. When I questioned him, he'd insist they were gifts for me that I'd forgotten." She paused, eyes distant. "Then I found the box." "What box?" Morales prompted gently. Hidden behind his first editions, a handcrafted cedar box containing mementos, a tube of lip gloss, a single earring, a friendship bracelet. Small personal items that couldn't possibly be mine. When confronted, he claimed they were tokens of appreciation from grateful students. By early afternoon, forensic technicians returned to the Whitmans' primary residence with a specific warrant for the hidden collection Catherine had described. They methodically dismantled the professor's extensive bookshelf, removing valuable first editions with careful hands. One technician noticed an irregularity in the back panel, a seam nearly invisible unless directly inspected. Removing the panel revealed a shallow compartment containing an ornately carved cedar box, exactly as Catherine had described. Inside, nearly 40 small items were arranged chronologically, each with a small label bearing only initials and a date. Helen Chambers gasped when shown the collection, immediately identifying a tiny teddy bear keychain near the bottom of the display. "I gave this to Madison on her first day of college," Helen whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "To match Pip, her bear. She attached it to her dorm keys." Early evening brought structural engineers and forensic specialists to the Pearl Street house, equipped with ground-penetrating radar to examine the basement floor. The equipment revealed distinct anomalies beneath the new concrete, areas where the soil had been disturbed recently. "Something's definitely been buried here," the technician confirmed, showing Morales the screen displaying darker shapes beneath the concrete. Multiple areas of disturbance, approximately 6 feet long each. At the evening strategy meeting at the police station, the district attorney explained the challenges they still faced despite mounting evidence. "Trophies are circumstantial," Coleman cautioned. "They prove obsession, not murder. Without direct physical evidence linking Whitman to Madison's disappearance, a jury might still have reasonable doubt." This assessment enraged Robert Chambers, who confronted Morales in the hallway afterward. "My daughter is dead. You know it. He killed her. What more do you need? A signed confession." Later that night, Whitman returned to his empty home after being released from questioning. The house, once meticulously arranged by Catherine, now echoed with emptiness. Her clothes, photographs, and personal items gone without a trace. He sat motionless on the bare sofa, his expression unreadable as he stared at Madison's photograph in the newspaper lying on the coffee table. The following morning, Chloe Patel published her extensive investigative report in the Burlington Free Press, detailing all evidence and inconsistencies in the case. After the publication hit newsstands, she returned to the newspaper office to find a plain manila envelope on her desk. Inside was a single page torn from a journal, the handwriting immediately recognizable as Madison's. Professor W insists on private meetings after classes. Said he'll fail me if I don't attend. I don't know what to do. I need to talk to someone. The Burlington Free Press flew off newsstands throughout the city. By 6:30 that morning, the bold headline, "The Silence of the Willows, the Unsolved Case of Madison Chambers," had captured the community's attention, rekindling interest in a mystery that had begun to fade from public consciousness. In the newspaper's editorial office, Chloe Patel's fingers trembled as she opened the anonymous envelope that had appeared on her desk. The single journal page inside bore handwriting she instantly recognized from her months investigating the case. Madison's neat script detailed her fear of Professor Whitman in words both clear and chilling. Professor W insists on private meetings after classes. Said he'll fail me if I don't attend. I don't know what to do. I need to talk to someone. Chloe immediately called Detective Morales, who arrived within 20 minutes to collect the new evidence. "Whoever sent this knows things we don't," he said, carefully placing the page in an evidence bag, "and they're finally ready to talk." Across town at the University Administration Building, an emergency meeting had been hastily convened. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as the university president slammed his hand on the polished table. "We need a unified response to these allegations," he insisted, waving a copy of the Free Press. "This article practically accuses a tenured professor of murder." The public relations director nodded vigorously, while the university council looked deeply uncomfortable. "I strongly recommend supporting Professor Whitman publicly while conducting an internal review," the PR director suggested. "We must protect the institution's reputation above all." Outside the meeting room, Assistant Professor Elaine Montgomery paced nervously before her scheduled interview with Chloe Patel. When the young journalist arrived, Montgomery led her to an empty classroom where they wouldn't be overheard. "Everyone knew," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "There were whispers, complaints, concerns, but the department prioritized his reputation over student safety." Montgomery twisted her wedding ring anxiously. "Some students came to me directly, but the department chair said Whitman was eccentric and that the girls were misinterpreting his academic interest in them." By early afternoon, Detective Morales and Torres were engaged in a video conference with Phoenix Police Department. On screen, Detective Sandra Martinez shared details about Melissa Jenkins, a former student of Whitman's who had disappeared in 2016. "Family reported her missing after 3 months without contact," Martinez explained. "Initial investigations suggested voluntary estrangement. She'd mentioned wanting to start fresh after a difficult relationship. Given her age and circumstances, we had limited resources to pursue it." The pattern became clearer when they connected with Chicago authorities regarding Danielle Foster, another former student who had vanished in 2014. Both women had been in Whitman's classes, both had dropped his course mid-semester, and both had disappeared without a trace. Most disturbing was the physical resemblance between all three women. Madison, Melissa, and Danielle were all slender blondes with delicate features and blue eyes. Photographs of the three side by side revealed a distinct type that couldn't be coincidental. By late afternoon, Judge Sullivan was reviewing the mounting evidence in his chambers. The connection to other missing women had shifted his perspective significantly. "This changes things," he acknowledged, signing a comprehensive search warrant that authorized ground-penetrating equipment and structural alterations at the Pearl Street property. As darkness fell, the forensic team arrived at the Victorian house with specialized radar equipment. Technicians worked methodically across the basement floor, monitoring screens for anomalies. "There," the lead technician said suddenly, pointing to a distinct shadow on the monitor. "The north wall. There's a void behind it that doesn't match the building plans." Engineers carefully removed a section of the wall, revealing a small concealed space. Within it sat a metal box, sealed against moisture and time. Morales supervised its careful extraction and transport to the forensic lab, where technicians documented its opening under strictly controlled conditions. Inside, preserved in waterproof packaging, lay Madison's complete journal, her yellow dress meticulously folded, and her university ID card. The journal's final pages included the entry previously discovered, but continued beyond it, detailing Madison's systematic documentation of Whitman's predatory behavior toward multiple students. Near midnight, Morales read the journal's final entry dated September 14th, the day Madison disappeared. "Finally gathered the courage to speak with Dean Stevens tomorrow. I have proof now, not just my testimony. I found 2 other girls who will speak up. He can't silence all of us. I'm scared, but more frightened of letting him continue doing this to others. Going to the dock tonight to clear my head before everything. Being near water always helps me think." The following morning, heavy equipment arrived at the Pearl Street house. A backhoe was positioned near the basement entrance, ready to completely remove the concrete floor once the forensic team had completed their preliminary documentation. Helen and Robert received the news about Madison's recovered journal in Morales's office. They sat in stunned silence as the detective explained what they'd found, neither able to form words as the reality of their daughter's final days became clearer. By early afternoon, workers methodically broke through the concrete basement floor, section by section, following a pre-marked grid. Police officers and forensic technicians observed attentively, documenting each stage of the excavation. As the sun began to set, a specialized cadaver dog was brought to the scene. The animal moved purposefully across the exposed earth, suddenly stopping at a specific section of the broken concrete. Its urgent barking and pawing at the ground triggered immediate activity as the forensic team cordoned off the area. After hours of careful excavation, silence descended over the Pearl Street house when forensic technicians uncovered not only Madison Chambers' remains, but also those of 2 other young women buried side by side in the basement soil, and in Madison's still-preserved hand, clutched tightly, was a cufflink bearing the initials LW. Floodlights illuminated the Pearl Street basement as forensic technicians worked through the night, carefully documenting and extracting the remains found beneath the concrete floor. Dr. Patricia Winters, the chief medical examiner, supervised each meticulous step, her experienced eyes cataloging details that would later become crucial evidence. "We need to preserve everything exactly as found," she instructed, photographing Madison's hand still clutching the damning cufflink. "The positioning is intentional." She was making her final accusation. At 9:15 that evening, Morales approached Whitman's elegant home, warrant in hand and flanked by uniformed officers. The professor opened the door in his bathrobe, his momentary surprise quickly masked by practiced indifference. "Lawrence Whitman, you're under arrest for the murders of Madison Chambers, Melissa Jenkins, and Danielle Foster," Morales stated, a grim satisfaction in his voice as officers placed handcuffs on the academic's wrists. Neighbors emerged from surrounding homes, witnessing in shocked silence as the respected professor was led to a waiting police car. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd, rumors that had circulated for years suddenly crystallizing into horrifying reality. Close to midnight, Chief Larson stood before a hastily assembled press conference, camera lights creating harsh shadows across his exhausted face. "I can confirm that human remains have been discovered at a property connected to Lawrence Whitman. Preliminary identification suggests 3 victims, including Madison Chambers." Reporters shouted questions as Larson raised his hands for silence. "This remains an active investigation, and we ask for patience as we complete our work." The following morning, Helen and Robert sat side by side in Dr. Winter's office, their hands nearly touching on the armrests between them, the closest they had been physically in months. They listened in numb silence as the medical examiner confirmed what DNA testing would later verify. The remains recovered from the basement belonged to their daughter. Based on our examination, Madison died from manual asphyxiation, Dr. Winters explained gently. There are fractures to the hyoid bone consistent with strangulation. Death would have occurred within hours of her disappearance. The preliminary court hearing later that morning presented a stark contrast. Whitman, disheveled in his orange jumpsuit, maintained an air of academic detachment as he pled not guilty to all charges. From the gallery, families of all three victims watched in restrained anguish, their collective grief filling the courtroom with palpable weight. In the forensic laboratory, technicians confirmed that the cufflink found in Madison's hand matched a set given to Whitman by the university on his 10th anniversary of tenure. The distinctive monogrammed LW in gold against onyx provided a direct physical connection between victim and killer. 6 months later, as summer gave way to autumn, Whitman's trial began. The courthouse overflowed with spectators and media from across the country. Helen clutched Pip the teddy bear, as she had throughout the investigation, drawing strength from this last connection to her daughter as the prosecutor delivered her opening statement. This case will show how Lawrence Whitman used his position of power to prey upon vulnerable young women, and when one brave student prepared to expose him, he silenced her permanently, the prosecutor stated, her voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. Throughout the following weeks, a parade of witnesses revealed the extent of Whitman's predatory behavior. Jennifer Weber testified through tears how the professor had cornered her in his office, suggesting her academic future depended on private arrangements. When she rebuffed him, her work suddenly received failing grades. Catherine Whitman's testimony proved particularly damning. She described decades of psychological manipulation and her growing suspicions about her husband's special students. Her voice trembled as she admitted her complicity through silence, explaining how she had found and hidden evidence to protect a man she feared. "I discovered a student's earring in our bed," she testified, unable to meet the eyes of the victims' families. "When confronted, he convinced me I was being paranoid, that a student must have dropped it during a tutorial session in his home office. I chose to believe him because the alternative was too horrifying." Forensic testimony confirmed that all three victims had been killed in the same manner, manual strangulation, and buried with seemingly ritualistic care side by side beneath the basement floor. The bodies had been positioned facing east, hands crossed over their chests, except for Madison's right hand, which still grasped the incriminating cufflink. After 6 days of testimony and only 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Silence fell over the courtroom as the verdicts were read. Guilty on all counts. Whitman's composed facade finally cracked, his face contorting with suppressed rage as the judge pronounced 3 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole. 2 weeks later, hundreds gathered for Madison's funeral in the university gardens. Dylan placed sunflowers, her favorite, on the polished casket. Abigail left a small toy pink scooter, tears streaming down her face as she whispered a final goodbye to her friend. A year after the conviction, Helen and Robert stood together, cutting the ribbon at the Madison Chambers Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of academic abuse and funding improved campus safety systems. Their shared purpose had not mended their broken marriage, but had given them a path forward through grief. 2 years later, the Victorian house on Pearl Street was demolished. In its place rose a small memorial garden dedicated to Madison, Melissa, and Danielle. At its center, a simple bench bore a plaque with words from Madison's journal. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to speak even when your voice trembles." 5 years after Madison's disappearance, Helen walked alone through the campus on an autumn afternoon, watching students passing on scooters and bicycles. In the library, She paused briefly to touch the restored pink scooter displayed at the entrance of the new wing dedicated to gender studies and advocacy against violence, named in honor of Madison. Beside it, a simple plaque contained the last words written in her daughter's journal. "Some truths require us to be brave. Tomorrow, I will be brave."